And so here you have it. We missed last week because of this here. We're now on the stage, and soon tonight, this whole theater is going to be filled with people, and this stage is going to be filled with dancers flying through the air and tumbling and doing their magic and making things look so easy. Just like supposedly I've made this look easy. But as you can see, everybody has to put their part into this. Right now, there's even the sound guy trying to get everything together for tonight. These little things are the one things that make things come together. It's not just the dance, it's the arts, it's the sound, it's the lights, it's everything that's going to make all this come to life. Now, working with dancers, or I should say, trying to emulate or illustrate dancers, is something you're going to have to understand in understanding the canon of the human body. And that's why we're starting off with the basics on this one here. And of course, we'll go into intermediate, and then of course, we'll go into advanced, but we're going to break everything down on the body, and then we'll go into the physiology of the body and how one muscle actually helps the other to build another, et cetera, and moving on. But you can see, in order to get all of that together, again, as I keep using, to get there, we have to be here. And that's what we're going to learn on this episode of Artifacts. Come on. So, as you can see, as we sit here on Pride Rock, this is where a lot of the dancers are going to be, running up and down and making the magic happen. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work from everyone. As I said earlier, what you see on the stage is just a small percentage of what it takes to do everything else, such as the sets, the lights, the sound. All that comes into play. And if you're not working with a professional group of people, it's going to fall apart. And it'll fall apart real fast. Come on, let's go see one more thing and then we'll head on out. So as you can see, all of that is able to come together and create what we have here. Isn't that right? You see, he even agrees too.
It's a lion! The lion sleeps tonight.
You're the king.
The king approaches!
Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. All the superheroes, as well as supervillains, were designed and illustrated by artists that understand the anatomy and physiology of the human body. This includes my own superhero athletes of sorts.
Coming to a YouTube channel near you.
Wow, I wasn't expecting that, but yes, these characters are part superhero, part athlete, and part scholastic genius. They are
Dominating.
well, I guess, the Elite Seven. And they are the counterpart to these characters. Yeah, the Rollerbots, who are a counterpart to these characters. Oh well, not these guys, but they're based on these world sculptures and arts. Yes, the librarians of historical culture and knowledge. These characters now are based on a whole genre of 40 years of research and how they work together and how they take past and present and create critical thinking. It's an animation program that I'm working with, and
there he goes again.
yeah, well, that was rude, but in essence, he was pretty much correct. I've got to stay focused here, but that'll be for another time. What we're working on is we are working now on the basic fundamentals of the human body. But let's start off with the Vitruvian Man, who was invented by my friend here, Leonardo. So what is the Vitruvian Man? Well, the Vitruvian Man is a drawing such as this. It was a drawing that was developed by Leonardo after researching about the human body. Why is it called the Vitruvian Man? Why not just something like the proportions of the human body? Well, in actuality, it goes through his notes. And in his notes, it's stated there, see if I can get this pronounced correctly, le proporzioni del corpo umano secondo Vitruvius. That's basically what it is. Yeah. And what does it translate? Well, it simply translates to the proportion of the human figure after Vitruvius, or the proportional study of man in the mannerism of Vitruvius. And there you have it. Huh?
Well, go on then.
Well, go on.
Well, go on then.
Well, go on now.
Right. Sorry, who's Vitruvius? I guess I could explain that. Well, Vitruvius was a Roman architect that lived right around the 1st century BC. And his theory was that he looked at the human figure almost architecturally. And it was found in his, well, we could call it his thesis or his writings and arguments about the human body in De Architectura, and that was basically a story or his argument about how the human body, if you laid the man out or laid a man out flat on the floor, that he could fit perfectly in a square or in a circle, with the navel being the base or the center of the human body. Now, through all of his writings, he never had any illustrations. So now let's fast forward to where we are at the Renaissance period. There were many artists before Leonardo and during Leonardo's time that tried to basically reproduce those writings, except they were either putting the square in and then the circle, and then they weren't really following to exact proportions to what was going on, and fingers were coming out of proportion, arms were out of proportion, everything wasn't quite right. So Leonardo, as the brilliant man that he is, why we call him the Renaissance man, because he's just more than an artist. He's a mathematician, he's an engineer, etc., etc. Anyway, he did studies, and he measured young men, and he measured all the proportions to what they had written out, what Vitruvius had written out. And he came up with these formulas that actually came up with the drawing which we have today as the Vitruvian Man. Now, we do give credit to Leonardo because he took all of those writings and he actually put them into an illustration, and then of course gave credit to Vitruvian for the first writings of the proportions of the Vitruvian Man, or proportions of the human body. So why is this important? Well, the Vitruvian Man is used today, almost 600 years after he had written this. And a lot of things in math and science and even anatomy we're still using that Leonardo has discovered or he researched, and that's pretty impressive. The Vitruvian Man shows the beginning of physics, or the physiology of how the human body works, and it's a good introduction to learn or understand. Let's put it that way, to understand. You don't have to really delve into it, but to understand what the physiology of the human body is like, and to understand how this works. Well, let's take a look at what Leonardo had drawn. You can see here that the Vitruvian Man, as drawn out by Leonardo, has everything in proportion. The circle, the square, and everything is laid out. Questions were also brought up. Is it really in proportion? Well, let's take a look right here. As you can see, I did my own demonstration of the Vitruvian Man, and here I am lying down, and as I stretch my arms out, voila, the circle. You can see that my hands all fit in. Now, one hand isn't quite touching the circle, and that's not Leonardo's fault. That's the fault of the model, myself, because I'm not laying flat. I'm kind of torqued a little bit. I'm laying on the grass, and the camera isn't straight down upon me. But it gives you an idea of how this works. And then, of course, now as I move into the square, you can see how my body does fit into that square. And so Vitruvian was correct, and Leonardo's mathematical research and formulas do work, and voila, poof, our own version of the Vitruvian Man. The Professor Man, the Jacinto Man.
Mental, that one, I'm telling you.
Yeah, forget it. We'll just leave it at that.
That's a great idea.
The Vitruvian Man. But you can see that if drawn correctly and you have the correct model in the correct proportions, it does fit. So is that where we're starting with this? No, we're not going to start there. That's just an introduction to show you basically how things are going to work. There is an easier way to work this, and that's what we're going to do. And it's going to be based on the 7.5 head high formula for the adult figure. Now, we're not going to worry about teenagers or adolescents or babies or toddlers because their proportions are completely different. Babies are up to 4 heads high, and toddlers are 4 heads high. And then you get your younger kids, and they're 4.5 heads high. Your preteens are 6 heads or 6.5 heads high. We're not going to get into that. We just want to start the basics of the adult average idea individual. And so that's what we're going to work on next. So let's get all this together, and let's not be intimidated by this. This is just to give you a basic fundamental proportional area to build on so that you have an idea how to combine the entire human body and get it all together. So let's get cracking on this and let's see what we come up with. All right, let's go. And we're back. Okay, let's talk about the basics of the human body. All right, let's take a look at these drawings here. As you can see here, I have a stick figure. Yeah, we're starting off with stick figures, and we'll start off from the very beginning, but I'm kind of showing you here how everything correlates together. Okay, so the stick figure here, as you can see, is 7.5 heads high. That includes the head itself too. So actually 6 from the bottom of the head down would be 6.5, but including the head is 7. So the entire body is 7.5 heads high. If you look at the illustration as well, you'll notice that there are 3 heads on either side, and that's going to be the width of the shoulders of your figure. So already you now have a kind of idea of where you're going to go. So the shoulder width is 3 heads wide. The height of the body is 7.5 heads high. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. All right, so we have just the head. Now, from the neck to the navel area, as we would call it, the pubic bone, right in between that area, is going to be about 3 heads, including the head on the top of the shoulders. As you can see here, I have 1 head, and then neck to hip, 2 heads, which equals 3 heads. Now from that point there, you're going to go from the hip to the knee is 2 heads. So the kneecap to the hip there's 2 heads, and then from the kneecap to the ankle will be another 2 heads. And there are your 7 heads right there. Now, that's pretty basic. If you can stay within that and work that, you're going to do fine. Okay, so now we have the T-bar here, what I call, which is the cross, where the neck is, and then the 2 heads on either side, and that measures out to from shoulder to shoulder. And then you've brought it down the point to where the navel is. Now notice what I've done is I've created a simple box. It's the pelvis. And you don't want to attach the legs directly to the spine or the line coming vertically down. You're going to have those hips slightly wider, and they're going to be about the width of one head. So that's generally in that area. Now if it's a woman's pelvis, it's going to be a bit wider. If you remember when I talked earlier about the woman's pelvis, the skeletal system is different than the male. The female's pelvis is going to be a little wider. It's almost like a bowl, and it's designed that way to be able to carry a young baby for 9 months. And that pelvis starts to move and is stronger, and so the woman's hips are going to be somewhat wider, and that pelvis is going to be a bit wider, as opposed to the male, which is a little thinner, a little smaller, but the chest is broader. And I think we talked about that earlier during foreshortening, how the male's upper body is built more for utilitarian purposes. And again, we're not going to get into any kind of things of splitting hairs, but it's generally that's what the male body is designed for. It's stronger, the muscular structure is more dense, it's stronger. Pound for pound, men are physically stronger than women. That's a well-known fact. End of subject. And they're built differently to be able to create and to move things more so than what a woman does. It's not to say that a woman is weak. Okay, going down another track. But anyway, so that's what I have here. I have this somewhat box of a to represent the pelvis that I have on here. Now from there on either side is going to be the attachment of the legs, and they're going to go down to the kneecap, and that's going to be 2 heads high as I've shown here, and then followed below that is another 2 heads below the knee to the ankle, and then from the ankle to the bottom of the foot is about half a head. So that in itself, now you have the proportions generally of that. Now, let's go back up to the shoulder, and from the shoulder to the elbow is 1 head. As you can see, I've placed that there, and then from the elbow to the wrist is another head. And so now you have the general limbs of the body in proportion to basically work. Now, here is where I see the common error in working on the hands and feet. They are probably the hardest parts of the anatomy to work on. And inevitably, every beginning artist will make the hands and feet too small. So how do we determine what size they are? Okay, well, let's take those little bits and pieces here. When we get into the intermediate part of the hands and feet, we're going to break those down. I'm going to show you how to put the hands in proportion, but we're going to kind of do a little quick review on this one here. If you take your hand, let's take a look at the drawing. You'll see that the hand looks pretty big there, but it actually isn't. If you take your hand, I'm going to hold my hand up. The distance, this is going to be your halfway mark. And if you see, I take the distance from where my finger joins the palm to the bottom of my palm, and I come straight up, it's about halfway. So already, this is your halfway mark for your hand. Notice that my thumb comes about halfway up as well, and attaches to the side of the hand. It doesn't come up from here, and that's what I usually see a lot of drawings. It comes from the bottom and the side here. And the reason for that is so that the thumb can oppose and come forward, just like this. It swings sideways. It doesn't swing like the hands come down. it swings sideways. Sideways, down. Sideways, down. Once you understand that principle, you'll be able to better understand how the handles work. Once you understand this, now you see your proportion. So you want to measure that. That's going to be from fingertip, and this is the middle finger here, from here to here is the halfway point from here to here. Now, watch this. Your hand should be able to fit right here. There's the elbow, there's the wrist, and it fits right in between there. See how big that is? So on your stick figure, you're going to make your hand almost, not quite, almost the same size as the forearm itself. Now, the way you can do that is when you bring the hand down. Now remember, this is a static figure. It's just there. If you take a look at your hand, the tip of the hand should be close to the kneecap. If it's not near the kneecap, your hand's too small. Same thing with the foot. The foot actually could be placed in between the back of the heel to about the ankle. It fits in there somewhat. So it's almost like two heads long. And when you put, as you can see in the stick figure, it looks like the hands and feet are way too big. Well, it looks that way, but that's just the framework for what we're working on. Okay? All right, let's go to the next step. Okay, once we have everything in proportion there, the next thing we're going to do is, now, we're going to add, and I'm going to simplify this for you, we're going to add the muscular structure, which is basically, how do we call it? Bubbles. They're just, you're just creating circles and generalizations of where everything is laid in. Take a look at the pectoralis major, which are the pecs here, the majors here, and the minors here. Okay, so there's a difference between the two in itself here. And you don't have to really worry about that. We're just kind of generally getting an idea of how they look. Now, just by adding this, you can see now everything falls into proportion. This becomes a little more difficult, but this takes a little practice. Once you're able to lay this in, then the next step comes in where you're able to lay in the parts of the human body, which look like this. You can see how they now come into proportion, and now suddenly that stick figure doesn't look out of proportion anymore. You can see how everything is laid into proportion. Once we erase the lines and we erase everything else, you can see now the human body comes into the ideal proportion. And this is going to be something you're going to need to practice with. This is just the basics to work with. And you need to practice this over and over and over. And again, I emphasize practice, practice, practice in drawing. You can continue working on your practice, but also do things that you enjoy doing too. It doesn't mean that you're not working on anything else. It doesn't mean that you're not working on other projects. No, this is something you want to do in order to create or to move your repertoire of the arts even further. And this is the study part. Get past this and start understanding this, and you're going to see your work really start to move forward. And it takes some time to work on this. Now, I know we've kind of gone over this rather quickly. It's just the basics and fundamentals of what we have here. Oh, the other thing I was going to tell you was that there is a book, and that book is an anatomical book. Let me show it to you real quick. I'll be right back.
What's taking him so long?
What's taking him so long?
What's taking him so long? Uh-oh.
And we're back. This book is called Atlas of the Human Anatomy for the Artist. Right here. This is by Stephen Rogers Peck. I almost said Peak. This book here is probably the greatest reference to the human body ever. Now, I usually don't endorse other books. I've had this one since 1980. Seriously. This book was first published in 1951, over 70 years ago, and it's still on the bestseller charts for artists. This illustrator, Stephen Peck, phenomenal illustrations. It goes into every single detail of the human body, from the muscle structure to the bone structure to facial structure, everything that you can have and imagine. As a matter of fact, let me just show you some of the things that he has here. I mean, look at some of these illustrations. These are great. That he is just doing, and I still keep this as a reference. We talked about that in the last episode. I mean, he is covering everything, from the feet to the skeletal structure, pelvis. I mean, I could go on and on and on, and I'll have some of these small illustrations that you can see on here that you'll be able to see. But this book is a phenomenal book to have in your library, or to even have for yourself. And so I would strongly recommend, you can pick this up on Amazon. You can get the hardcover for $110, but why, when you can get the soft cover here? And I believe that'll run you about $25 to $35. I've even seen the used book that looks dog-eared like this for $9. You know, like I said, I've used this for years, and I still use this as a reference to go back to some of the stuff that I need to work with. So, Atlas of the Human Anatomy for the Artist by Roger Stephen Peck. I keep wanting to call him Peak. It is Peak, it's not Peck. Okay. Anyhow, but look that up. There, you see, you can see it really good. I'll keep it there for you. All right, so this book I would strongly recommend, and it will strongly help you into working and getting into the anatomy. He even shows the differences of aging from a toddler all the way to an 80-year-old man. The same thing with the woman, from a toddler to an 80-year-old woman, and how the body changes and the posture, and et cetera, et cetera. But this is a dynamic book. I would not recommend a medical book. I mean, you could have one, that would be great to have as a side reference, but for the surface of the human body, this is going to be great. Okay, that's going to end this episode of Beginning Drawing, and next episode we're going to break everything down from different parts of the body, and we'll get into more detail about that. So before we close, let's head out to the Academy, and we're going to see how the Forest Dance Academy, how the work that I was working on how it's going to look, and how they're performing with all the sets. And you can see now with the sets being put together, the dancers, the lights, and how everything works together. You're going to see how that all works. So come on, and we'll go look at the last few scenes there, and we'll call it a night after that. So this ends the whole program. And you can see how this actually comes together. It's another set that we finished up. As you can see, working on the basic human anatomy, it's going to be basically something you're going to have to learn. If you're going to end up drawing stuff like dancers and athletes who are moving around. So on the next episode, we're going to be talking about a little more about the technical side and getting into the intermediate part of the human body. So As always, may the Lord be with you. And remember, like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you on the next episode of Artifacts. Take care.
Pantalabamba!